Alright. Hey there. Welcome back to the Terraria forums. I'm Swyte, and today we're going to be taking a look at the buffs, nerfs, reworks, overall balance changes of the magic and summoner weapons that came in with the Terraria 1.4 update. So, I'm gonna be real, I have not used magic and summoner nearly as much as I've used melee and ranged, so I won't know as much about some of these weapons, so I won't be able to give as deep of an opinion, but I will try my best and go over all of these for you guys. Before we get started, if you guys like this type of video and want to see more, please let me know in the comments down below and leave a like, and if you wouldn't mind, subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate it. And without further ado, let us get right into the balance changes. First of all, we have the meme itself, the Wand of Sparking. It got buffed. I mean, like, everything got buffed on this page. There's a lot of buffs. But for the Wand of Sparking, they increased the damage from 8 to 14. They decreased the use time from 28 to 26. They increased the on-fire chance from 33 to 50%. And now it has a 10% crit chance. So the Wand of Sparking was just overall a very underwhelming weapon. So they gave it a buff, and I think it's a very substantial buff, since you can get it right out the gate, go into a game, run around your world in the purity, find normal chests, and there can be a Wand of Sparking in there. And 14 damage is pretty good for a weapon that early in the game. So, I mean, I still don't think the Wand of Sparking is going to be useful any further than the very beginning of the game, but it is definitely going to be much more useful right in the beginning, so it's not just a throwaway weapon. You can actually keep the Wand of Sparking and use it, and it'll help you clear out mobs quite well. For the next two weapons, we kind of have a very similar thing. They both got reworked and buffed. We have the Magic Missile first. The projectile for the Magic Missile is faster, and it has homing if you release it. It has a moderate AoE damage explosion on impact now. The use time is increased from 17 to 18, and the mana cost is increased from 10 to 12. So I don't think that the nerfs to it, the two on the bottom, are anything too significant. It's not going to affect how you use this very much, but the buffs are going to be very important. It'll hit things quicker, so it has a better chance of hitting things before they can move out of the way. And it does home, so I mean, even if they do move it out of the way, it's just gonna follow them and blow up on them, because now it has an explosion effect. So this is going to be good. Well, when you get into the dungeon, for sure, it's going to be a good weapon, because, you know, the skeletons are always ganging around you, so you'll be able to just shoot this little home-in on a group and blow them all up. For the Flame Lash, we have a very similar thing. The projectile is faster and homing. It pierces and can hit a second time, and it has moderate AoE damage explosion after the second hit. So very similar to the Magic Missile as far as the buffs go, but this one pierces, and I think only after the second hit it has the AoE damage. For the nerfs on it, we have the damage decreased from 40 to 36, the use time increased by 33%, mana cost increased from 12 to 18, so much more significant nerfs than the Magic Missile got, but it's still going to be balanced now because it has piercing, and it explodes, and it is homing. So it overall is going to deal way more damage, it's going to be useful in more situations, and it's just going to be better overall. Moving on, we have the Staff of Frost. The use time is decreased from 20 to 16, and the mana cost decreased from 14 to 12, so a little buff for the Staff of Frost. The Staff of Frost is a really basic weapon, I think. Like, it's nothing special. Nothing special comes to mind when I think of the Staff of Frost. And I mean, I don't think it's going to be that much better, but it is more usable. So if you do use the Staff of Frost, you can definitely use it more, because it's faster and it costs less mana to use. And moving on to the Cursed Flames, which got buffed, the damage was increased from 36 to 50. The use time was decreased from 20 to 15, and the mana cost was decreased from 12 to 9. So overall buffs, and also at the bottom it says Sea Cursed Inferno buff, which got changed, which I'll scroll down to in a second and show you guys. But the damage was increased by 14, which is quite significant. And the reason for these buffs on the Cursed Flames, I think, is to balance it out with the Golden Shower, which inflicts Ichor and does good damage, and the Golden Shower is considered to be one of the best weapons in the game, while the Cursed Flames is definitely not. So they're trying to balance out the two counterparts of the Corruption and Crimson. So I think that the Cursed Flames is definitely going to be much better, especially considering the Cursed Inferno buff, which I'll scroll down to and show you guys right now. As you can see right here, with the Cursed Inferno debuff, the damage per second was increased from 12 to 24 on both player and enemy versions of the debuff. The Ghoul, Clinger, and Spasmatism Cursed Inferno duration decreased to mitigate the increased danger to the player, and all other sources of this debuff are intended recipients of the improved damage. So the two things down there are just clarifications about, you know, how you're not gonna be getting completely and utterly melted by Spasmatism when he shoots out his stream of Cursed Inferno, because that's no fun. But the DPS that the buff does is literally just doubled, which is massive for anything. Just 100% extra damage added on. So it is a fire debuff to the maximum, and I think that this is going to make the Cursed Flames a quite viable weapon. Not just this, also the other buffs to the weapon itself, but I think that this is definitely going to help it out as well. Okay, let's move back up to the magic weapons. And next up, we have the Flower of Frost, which got buffed as well. The damage was increased from 55 to 60, the use time was decreased from 20 to 12, mana cost decreased from 17 to 11, and it increased the Frostburn chance from 50% to 100%. So, substantial buffs to the Flower of Frost. I think it's going to be good if you get it. I mean, like, it's something I'm going to have to say about a lot of these, because I'm not exactly sure what specifically they're going to be really good for, but I do think that it is going to be better. Obviously, it's buffed in 4 different ways, and I think this is going to be good for just high health single target mobs, maybe some bosses. I think it's going to be pretty decent. We have the Crystal Storm here. The damage was increased from 25 to 32, and the mana cost increased from 4 to 5. So the damage was increased by 7, and the mana cost was also increased, so takes more mana. The mana cost is only up to 5, so I don't think that's that much. This is, I believe, a fast-firing kind of inaccurate weapon. It may not be that inaccurate, but I'm not sure. It's a very fast-firing weapon, has a good amount of DPS, and they're going to be changing it so that it has more DPS, and I think that's good. I do think Crystal Storm is going to be viable. Next, we have the Poison Staff, which got reworked and buffed. And this note says, due to piercing immunity frames previously, only one projectile from each shot would hit each target, resulting in a lot of lost damage. We've implemented a system that allows all of the projectiles to hit a target, dramatically improving its shotgun-like functionality. However, to offset this gain, it has to have some of its stats reduced. On the whole, this should now be a stronger weapon. So, it's basically saying that there was a issue with the immunity frames that would make it so that not all the bolts would hit from the Poison Staff, and now they all will. And I think that's awesome. I really like shotgun type weapons, if I'm being honest. I think they're really cool. And the damage was decreased from 48 to 43, reduced number of enemies that each projectile can hit from 4 to 3. Each projectile will deal 25% less damage for each target it hits. Projectiles now have a limited range. So it's kind of similar to the Flamethrower reworks. They weren't reworks, they were just changes. How each time you hit another target when you're piercing enemies, it'll do less damage. I'm not sure if the immunity frame thing actually had an effect on bosses or not. I just don't remember if it does or not, or it doesn't specify or anything. I just don't know if bosses actually have these immunity frames. I think it is going to be better because as a shotgun type weapon, I think it is meant to be kind of a more close range, high damage to single or very few targets type of weapon. And yeah, I like this rework and buff, and I'm excited to try the Poison Staff. We have the Crystal Vial Shard next, which got buffed. This is kind of a meme weapon too, because it was just considered extremely useless. The damage was increased from 19 to 25. The duration that the projectiles linger and deal damage is increased by roughly 70%. So I don't think it's going to be helpful against any bosses or anything like that. It's good for hitting things that you can't get to otherwise, i.e. through walls, and for dealing with groups of enemies. And I think that the Vial Shard is going to be significantly better against those type of situations, especially events and stuff where you have groups of enemies coming from each side. The projectiles will shoot out and they'll stay around for longer, which will increase the damage output massively along with the 6 extra damage that it got. So I think that this is going to be a legitimately pretty decent weapon against things like pirates and those types of invasions, if there's multiple linear hitboxes on something or there's multiple enemies, that is when I think that the Crystal Vial Shard will actually be decent. Moving on, we have the Clinger Staff, and I've honestly never used the Clinger Staff. I don't think I've ever gotten the Clinger Staff. But I know it makes a, like, pillar of cursed flames erupt out of the ground, and honestly, I don't think that it's very useful as is. Like, it just doesn't seem that good against the different things in the game. But the height of the Clinger Flames was increased by 50%, so it's higher. It doesn't have a hit limit. It can now inflict the Cursed Inferno debuff, and it can now inflict critical hits. Okay, so, I mean, it's actually kind of significant because being able to inflict crits can be really big, depending on how you're building your character. For some reason it wasn't able to inflict the Cursed Inferno debuff, which I think is just stupid. It's a eruption of Clinger Flames. Cursed Flames. Why didn't it inflict Cursed Inferno? What is going on here, Logic? But at least it does it now, and it does get the increased damage of the Cursed Inferno debuff that got added. Clinger Staff, it's just, you can't aim it at anything. It just stays there. It doesn't shoot. So I think it's going to be weird to use, but it is probably going to be decent for invasions and stuff. Again, kind of like the Crystal Vial Shard just above it, because you can just leave the Pillar of Fire on like one side of you, and it'll just do damage to enemies that are crossing it, and then you can focus on other enemies on the other side, so it'll just help in that regard. The Medusa head got a complete overhaul, and I'm gonna be real, I've never seen the Medusa head before, or I've never seen it and like realized exactly what it did. Rather than being charged, this weapon is now channeled, and its range is substantially reduced. And I think that means that instead of like having to have it charge up before it can work, it'll just instantly work. When channeled, it will be held in front of the player. If no enemies are present, it will not fire and will consume no mana. When in range, it constantly attacks enemies, consuming mana for each attack. Can hit up to 3 targets with each attack, which does not consume extra mana per target. I don't know why it would, but okay. Damage is now set to 40, and the mana cost has been decreased from 18 to 15. But because it can fire up to 4 times per second, this increases the speed at which it consumes mana. So, I really don't know how good this is going to be since I've not seen it being used. I didn't see the old Medusa head being used. I know the old Medusa head was seen as very bad. It sounds like, again, kind of like these other weapons that we've just gone through, it's going to be much more useful against events and anywhere where there's large groups of enemies, since this will just like it sounds like this is just like AoE all around you. Once you like, if you're just holding it up, it will hit around you, and it fires fast, up to 4 times per second. It can pierce, so I think it's going to be really strong in places like the dungeon, during events, like I already said, blood moons, eclipses. It's going to be good in those situations. I really don't know about bosses. Maybe it'll be useful in some situations with bosses that have multiple hitboxes, like when Plantera first blows up into her second form, she has all of the like little summons that are the tendrils. We'll just have to see how that ends up working, if the Medusa head's range can actually reach all the different summons in situations like that, and yeah. Okay, so we have the first nerf on this list, the Sky Fracture. The mana cost was increased from 14 to 17. So you can't use it as much before you run out of mana. I never saw the Sky Fracture as being a extremely powerful weapon. Decent weapon, but not super powerful, but I guess it might have been a little bit too powerful, because it's a small nerf, so it wasn't like OP or anything, but maybe a little too powerful, so I have not used the Sky Fractures, so I don't know. Spirit Flame got buffed, and I think that is the Black Lantern that you can make with the Forbidden Fragments. I think they're Forbidden Fragments. But the use time was decreased from 30 to 22, and the mana cost was decreased from 18 to 14, so cost less mana, you can use it faster. It shoots out flames. It's definitely kind of a shrug weapon, the Spirit Flame, so I don't think that this will make it into anything special, but it'll make it better. You can use it quicker, doesn't cost as much mana. The Rainbow Rod rework / buff. I think the Rainbow Rod is another thing just like the Flame Lash and Magic Missile, so that's what this is. The projectile is faster, has homing if you release it. It pierces and hits up to 3 times. It has a moderate AoE radius on impact, and damage decreased from 74 to 50. Use time increased from 18 to 25. Mana cost increased from 18 to 21, and it can touch tiles without exploding now. In regards to that last one, I don't know if that means that it can go through blocks, which would be kind of crazy. What else? Like, if it touches tiles and doesn't explode and can't go through them, then what happens? Anyways, it's faster and has homing, so it's like those other two weapons. It can pierce 3 enemies, so it's going to be better for piercing things. And it has a AoE radius on impact, and I guess that means that it won't blow up if it, like, hits one enemy, kind of like the magic missile will, or the flame lash after it pierces an enemy. Whenever it hits an enemy, it'll just have an area around it that has damage being done, I think. It seems like it's not going to be used against bosses. Well, some bosses, again. Plantera's summons, Golem, it might be able to be used against. Anything with multiple hitboxes that are close together, this could be good for. We have the Unholy Trident next, and this item it still is. It's the one that is dropped from Red Devils in the Underworld, I think. So the use time was decreased from 22 to 17, and the mana cost was decreased from 25 to 19. And I don't know how much this will do, because the Unholy Trident as a weapon itself, just like how it works, I don't think is very effective against much. You can use it a decent bit faster, and it doesn't cost as much mana, so it'll definitely be stronger, but it's like, I seem to remember the projectile being fairly slow and not with a big hitbox, and I think that kind of made it so that it didn't really do that much. I feel like it probably pierces though, so it is going to be good for the things I've mentioned before with the groups of enemies. I don't know about bosses. It has more damage output, and you can use it for longer without having to recharge your mana, so it'll definitely be better, but I'm not sure how good, because that kind of depends on how good it was before that as well, and I'm not quite sure about that. The Tome of Infinite Wisdom is a Old One's Army drop. I don't know what it drops from. I think it's maybe the Ogre. The damage was increased from 24 to 32, and the use time was decreased from 30 to 25. I don't know how to really rate the Tome of Wisdom. I don't think it's that great. It's a cool concept, and it has multiple attack modes, giving it a fairly large damage increase. As well, if you know about like any of these things that I'm saying, I don't know, give me your opinions down in the comments for sure. Give me your opinions and tell me what you think about all these weapons. Now we're going to move down to the Venom Staff, which got reworked and buffed, much like the Poison Staff. It's the same thing as the Poison Staff, as you can see. Should be much improved in actual use, but needs stat reductions to offset this change. Give it a try before you judge. So the damage was increased by almost 20. It reduced the number of enemies that each projectile can hit from 7 to 5. Each projectile will deal 25% less damage for each target it hits, and now has a range before projectiles die, but it's longer than the Poison Staffs. So again, can't hit things from as far away. It'll just do significantly more damage, and yeah, it's an upgrade to the Poison Staff. Do all the things the Poison Staff does, but with a lot more damage. So yeah, Venom Staff and Poison Staff, as I've already said, I think they're going to be pretty good. We have the Wasp Gun up next, which got buffed, and it says the adjustments made to Wasp Gun may sound like a nerf on paper, but due to defense effects, the loss of total hits in exchange for higher direct damage will actually result in dramatically more DPS for the Wasp Gun. Less wasps, more damage. I don't exactly know about defense effects, so I don't know what that means here, but the damage was increased by 10. Use time increased from 11 to 18, so use it slower. Wasps can bounce and pierce only 3 times instead of 4. The wasps per cast was reduced to an average of 3, and the mana cost was increased from 6 to 10, so it got like 4 nerfs and 1 buff. I'm not sure how this is going to work. I'm not sure how much more DPS that the Wasp Gun will get, but the Wasp Gun, as it does pierce and bounce, it'll probably be pretty good for swarm events, areas on the map. It does bounce around its stuff, so you can use it in caves and all that, and it'll probably be really good. Wasp Gun, gonna be better. All y'all's Wasp enthusiasts can have a fun time with this. Moving on to the Nettle Burst, which got buffed. The damage was increased from 28 to 35, and the mana cost was increased from 10 to 12. So, more mana, more damage. Won't be dramatically better, but will be better. I think it's an upgrade to the Crystal Vial Shard. It's for taking on groups of enemies, hitting enemies through walls, good for invasions and for underground, a dungeon, all that stuff. We have the Spectre Staff now. Damage was decreased from 72 to 65. Each projectile can now hit up to 3 times rather than only once, and the mana cost was increased from 11 to 15. I don't know if these projectiles home, because I feel like they might. If they can home, that might mean that this might actually be better against bosses and single targets as well as groups, because with groups it'll be able to hit multiple times, multiple enemies, presumably. But if it can home with bosses, as long as they're not moving too fast, it might be able to kind of hit them and then turn around, home back in on them, and then hit them again, and then again, for the 3 times. So this might actually boost its damage on that as well. And if that is the case, I can see the Spectre Staff actually being really good. I'm not sure if that's the case though, clearly, so I'm not positive about that, but it definitely is going to be better at what it can do. It's not a single target weapon anymore, it's group as well, and possibly just doing like probably 2.5 plus times more damage to single targets if the bolt that it shoots can hit those multiple times. The Staff of Earth got buffed. The actual damage this weapon does is mostly unchanged, but it lists its max speed damage now rather than its low speed damage. It now has a 20% crit chance. The mana cost was increased from 15 to 18. The use time was decreased by 16. That's huge. The projectile speed was greatly increased. As a result, it has better range and is much harder to fall below the minimum threshold to maintain maximum damage. Okay, so the Staff of Earth has always kind of just been trash to me, but I think this is gonna make it good, at least decent. I think it pierces a lot, so if the projectile has a lot of speed, it's going to be piercing things, it's going to be doing high damage, because I think this weapon is pretty high damage. I'm not sure how good it's going to be for bosses, but I think it could be usable for some, because it has a projectile speed increase, which means it's going to be easier to hit the things that you're aiming at if they're further away, and it's also going to hit for maximum damage more often, as it says here. It also can crit, or it has a base crit chance at least, for 20%. 20% base crit is pretty dang good. So I think that the Staff of Earth is gonna be at least decent, and if not decent, pretty dang good. So we'll just have to see how that works, but I am quite excited to try out this new Staff of Earth, as it does seem to be quite different, almost more like a rework than a buff, but they didn't actually change anything about it as far as a rework would go. It just, the stats were changed in many different ways. Next we have the Heat Ray, which was reworked, and I've actually seen this, and I'm actually really excited about this Heat Ray rework, and I can't wait to try it out. And a note right here says, there are too many full piercing weapons at this tier, and not enough high single target damage weapons. Heat Ray changed to avoid redundancy with Shadow Beam Staff and Staff of Earth, and give the class more versatility. Also, I think the Heat Ray was just kinda bad. The damage was increased from 55 to 80, so 25 damage. And the use time was decreased from 16 to 10. It can no longer pierce and hit multiple enemies. I think that this Heat Ray is actually going to be really strong for bosses, and in general I think that's the most important thing for weapons. Like, if they're really good against bosses, they're pretty good in general, and I think the Heat Ray is going to be very good against bosses, because it is a 25% damage increase, which is pretty big, up from 55 to 80, and it also got its use time decreased to 10, and that is really fast. All bosses before Golem and bosses that have single target things after Golem, this will be good for that. At least good. And I think it could be extremely good if the damage actually really stacks up to making a very significant change. For the Bat Scepter, we have a rebalance. The average bats per cast was increased from 2 to 2.5, and the mana cost was increased from 3 to 6. So I don't know how good that's going to be, because it's very small. It's a nerf and a buff. So you shoot more bats than usual, but your mana cost is increased. So you use this for less time, but you shoot more bats. And the bats are what does the damage, obviously. So I think it can be a moderate to large damage boost, depending on, you know, how lucky you are with how many bats you're getting shot out of the Bat Scepter. But so you have like a significant amount more burst damage, but you can't use it for as long. It just depends on what you're going up against and how it scales up to the mana cost increase and extra damage you're going to be receiving. Because if you can like burst something down and kill it in the time before your mana is needed to regen, then this is definitely a much better change, and it'll make this more useful. But if you can't burst them all down and you have to let your mana recharge, it'll kind of just even out to the same thing as it was before. And we got our last two. First up, we have the Charged Blaster Cannon, which got a complete overhaul. This weapon still charges, but now fires constantly while charging. For the first second of charging, you'll fire 6 single-target pellets, each dealing a base damage of 100, up from 50. For the next 2 seconds, you'll fire 3 total piercing blasts, each dealing base damage of 250, up from 100. After this, it will shoot the laser beam, which is unchanged from the original implementation. You can also quick fire pellets without charging. The fire rate of these pellets is much higher than the previous implementation. The mana cost of charging is unchanged, however quick firing will naturally consume more mana as the fire rate has increased significantly. Okay, so that's kind of a lot to unpack, and I'm not sure what it means by original implementation. Charged Blaster Cannon was kind of bad, because you had to charge it up for quite a while and then it would just shoot a big laser beam. It's kind of like the last Prism, but worse. But now I can see it being very good. It's going to be very fun at least, because you shoot 6 single target pellets, which do a base damage of 100, in 2 seconds. So that's a pretty fast attack. That is a good amount of damage. I mean, a base damage of 100 is pretty dang strong. For the next 2 seconds, you fired 3 total piercing blasts, each dealing a base damage of 250. So it kind of seems like charging it up is still better instead of having to quick fire it, because even if you shoot just 3 of the piercing blasts, they deal a base damage of 250, which is like 2.5 times the damage of the pellets. So if you hit all 3 and you hit all 6 pellets, the 3 piercing blasts will do more damage than the pellets. Obviously, this is good for single target enemies, so it'll probably be pretty good for bosses. It'll also be good for events and areas, not like caves and stuff probably, but flatter areas, larger open areas. This will be a good weapon, because you get piercing blasts, and then you shoot the laser beam. And the laser beam is strong, it has big piercing, it does a lot of damage, and I think it's going to be quite good. And finally, we have the Nebula Blaze, which got buffed. And all that happened was that the use time was decreased from 15 to 12, and the mana cost was decreased from 18 to 12. So you can use it faster, and it doesn't cost as much mana. I suppose it was kind of underwhelming compared to some of the weapons that you could get from the pillars, like mostly just the ranger weapons, like the Vortex Beater and the Phantasm, which are, I think, probably the best pillar weapons. I'm not sure. The Stardust Dragon's up there too. But the Nebula Blaze is going to be fairly stronger. You can use it for longer without having to recharge mana, and you shoot it a decent bit faster. So it's going to have a fairly higher damage output. And that is going to do it for the magic weapons. And spoiler, there's not actually that much coming for the summon weapons, but we're just going to go down and check those out right now. And I'll show you the changes that did happen. As you can see, this is a small changelog, so we're just going to look at this regardless, though. We have a buff to immunity frames themselves. It says, some summons now use their own damage immunity timer system. In practice, what this means is that they will no longer interfere with the use of other weapons by maxing out the enemy's immunity frames. All affected minions are set on their own damage timer to most correctly match their pre-changed DPS, but some changes are expected, comparing 1.3.5 DPS to 1.4 DPS in general. Even if there are some minor loss or gain of DPS compared to pre-changed performance, it should be worth the improvement to overall performance. Examples of minions impacted by this change: Slime Staff, Spider Staff, Pirate Staff, Optic Staff, Raven Staff, Deadly Sphere Staff, Stardust Dragon Staff, some new summons. Some of the new summons also utilize this system. Okay, that was a lot. But I'm glad that they made this change, because I can see, because I've had this issue before. It's so annoying if, like, I have a Slime Staff and it'll just be hitting an enemy and I'll be swinging at it with my sword or whatever, and the sword just won't hit it because the Slime Staff is maxing out the immunity frames, and it lowers my damage. And it kind of makes it bad because the slime doesn't do as much knockback as a lot of other weapons that I could have at that point. So whatever it is that it's hitting is just going to come closer to me. It might hit me. If you're mixing summon weapons with normal weapons, it was very frustrating and annoying to deal with. And I'm glad that that is not a thing anymore. The Imp Staff got buffed. The damage was decreased from 21 to 17, and the fire rate was increased dramatically. So I'm not sure how fast this dramatic increase is, or how big the increase is, but this is definitely a good buff. The issue with the Imp Staff is that it just doesn't shoot fast enough. That is the problem, because if it's strong, it does a lot of damage. You can like have like 4 imps out, and they'll all just shoot a bolt just fast. It is piercing. It does a good amount of damage, but the issue is that, one, they're not always super accurate. They will miss, and honestly, they sometimes miss a lot. And it just feels like forever until they shoot again. So it's definitely good that they got a big fire rate increase. And 4 damage being taken out from the overall damage isn't that big, so I think that the Imp Staff is going to be quite a bit stronger. We have a buff to the Raven Staff as well. The damage was increased from 37 to 55, and the flight speed was doubled. So I don't know about the Raven Staff. I've not used it, or at least not much. But, I mean, pretty big damage buff. Flight speed is doubled. It's probably going to be balanced with the other things around where you can get it, or better. Who knows? But Raven Staff is better. We have a Rainbow Crystal Staff buff. The damage was decreased from 150 to 80. Keep reading. Smiley face. Because everyone's going to be like, V-Logic, what have you done? You nerfed something by 70 points of damage. What are you doing? Fixed accuracy issues. Improved the speed at which sparkles explode. Should easily do much more damage than before. And I mean, you can notice this if you ever use the Rainbow Crystal Staff. You'll see it shooting, and enemies just won't get hit, and sometimes they'll get hit, and it's really weird. But yeah, so they nerf the damage by a lot, but it hits much faster. And they had to do that so they wouldn't be busted, broken AF. So yes, I do like that change. It'll definitely be better for the Rainbow Crystal Staff. That's going to be fun to use. And that is basically it, except for this other section, which we'll just take a little look at. Summoned minions now adjust their damage dynamically based on your current equipment and damage buffs. If your summon damage increases or decreases, the summons will change accordingly. Does this mean that when you had minions out and you changed it around your stats, like if you took off a piece of Stardust armor or something and you had a minion out, or no, if you took the piece off and then you summon the minion and then you put the piece on, it would not add that extra damage to the minion while it was still out because you hadn't summoned it with the full set on. So I assume that's what that means, and I didn't know that was a thing before, but it is good they changed that, because I mean, you might just, you know, make armor, get a accessory, take it off, put it back on, and then you just will, not knowingly, you won't have those buffs. But now you do, because the summoned minions are better now. They're like, hey, look, you changed clothes and stuff? Good, we're stronger now. But anyways, that's gonna do it for this one, you guys. This is probably a little bit shorter than the last one, but that's okay. The last one was pretty long anyways. There is other balance changes that I could look at, but the weapons are the biggest section of this balance changes area on the forums, and I don't know if you guys would want to see these other things. If you do want me to go through this, there's some stuff up at the top as well above weapons, then you can let me know in the comments. Maybe I'll do it, but for now, that is all that I have for this video. Let me know you guys' thoughts about all this in the comments below. I'd like to see your opinions on all these changes, and yeah, I'll see you all in the next one.